So, what's the real deal with astrology? Is it a genuine map of our destiny? Something that's literally written in the stars? Or is it just a comforting story? Something we tell ourselves to make sense of a chaotic world? That's the big question we're diving into today, trying to figure out where astrology really fits in. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with its ancient history. Then we'll explore the spiritual ideas behind it, especially the concept of karma. After that, we'll flip the script and look at the tough scientific case against it, see what happens when it's actually tested, and finally, we'll land on the mystery at the heart of why this debate is still so alive and well. First up, let's go way back in time, because one thing you have to understand is that astrology is not some new age trend that just popped up. Its roots stretch back thousands and thousands of years, across some of the world's greatest civilizations. And it's not just some dusty ancient practice. For so many people today, it's deeply personal. You see comments like this all the time from a Reddit user who says so much of it has been eerily spot on. It's that powerful, personal feeling of resonance that has kept it popular for literally centuries. So, what even is a horoscope, fundamentally? Well, you can think of it like a celestial snapshot. It's basically a map of the heavens for one specific, single moment in time. And that map is said to hold a kind of symbolic language about that very moment. And believe me, this idea is ancient. We're talking undisputed evidence from the first dynasty of Babylon. There are records, like the famous Venus tablet, that date back to around 1700 BCE. I mean, even the ancient Romans were talking about it, with guys like Cato warning people not to listen to those Babylonian stargazers. But here's the thing. Western astrology isn't the whole story. Not by a long shot. Over in India, for instance, a system called Jyotisha, or Vedic astrology, developed with its own very distinct philosophy, one that's tied directly to deep spiritual concepts. And this spiritual connection is absolutely key. It shifts astrology from just being a tool to predict things into a language, a way to understand the deepest patterns of life itself. A core idea here is the graha. Now, in Vedic thought, this isn't just a physical planet. The Sanskrit word literally means to consume or to grasp. A graha is seen as a cosmic body that grabs and channels specific energies that, in turn, influence our lives. And this connects right into the idea of karma. From this point of view, the planets in your birth chart aren't causing your destiny. No, they're reflecting a pattern that was already put into motion by your own past actions. So it becomes less about seeing the future and more about understanding the results of your past. You can find this laid out in ancient texts. They describe these very specific planetary combinations called yogas, which are said to point towards certain life paths. For example, a Raja Yoga might indicate a path of leadership, like becoming a king, while a Pravraja Yoga could point to a more spiritual, ascetic life. So, what this really all boils down to is that in this framework, astrology isn't some external force controlling you. It's a tool for reading a life script that, according to this philosophy, you wrote yourself. Okay, so now we have to do a complete 180. Because for all its ancient history and all its spiritual depth, there is a very powerful, very persistent argument that astrology is, well, simply not real. This is the scientific case against it. Philosophers of science have been grappling with this for decades. Karl Popper, for one, argued that astrology fails a key test of science because it's unfalsifiable. You can't ever prove it wrong. There's always an excuse for a failed prediction. Then you have Thomas Kuhn, who had a slightly different take. He said astrology isn't science because it doesn't solve new problems. When a prediction fails, the theory doesn't change. They just explain it away. And this idea connects perfectly to what the philosopher Paul Thagard calls the problem of progress. I mean, think about physics or biology. They're constantly evolving, discovering new things. Astrology, he argues, has stayed pretty much the same for almost 2,000 years. So beyond the philosophy, there are three huge scientific objections. First, there's no known physical mechanism. The gravitational pull of Mars on you is actually weaker than the pull from a nearby bus. Second, there's the precession of the equinoxes. This is a big one. It's a slow wobble in Earth's axis, and it means that when a Western astrologer says the sun is in Aries, it's actually, astronomically, in the constellation Pisces. The signs and the stars are out of sync. And third, a lot of the claims are just so vague that they're basically untestable. So what happens when we stop talking theory and start looking at the data? Let's see how astrology actually holds up when you put it under the microscope. This is probably one of the most famous experiments ever done on this, published in the scientific journal Nature. They ran a rigorous double-blind test where top astrologers were given birth charts and asked to match them to personality profiles. The result? Their performance was no better than if they had just guessed randomly. Researchers have also looked at massive patterns, like analyzing 100 years of data to see if there was any correlation between planetary positions and when wars broke out. And as you can see from this data, absolutely no pattern. None. The results were totally random. But here's a modern twist that makes things a little more interesting. A recent study used machine learning, AI, to try and predict a person's profession from their birth chart, and the results were curious. While they were far from perfect, the best AI model hit 57% accuracy. Now, that's definitely better than the 33% you'd get from random guessing, but it's not a huge leap. It's not a slam dunk, but it's not nothing either. And that really brings us to the core of this whole debate. We're left with this deep, fundamental tension between two very different ways of seeing astrology, and maybe even the world. So many people who use astrology today kind of hold this view, like this one from Reddit user Astrocatson. They find real value and meaning in it, while at the same time, they completely acknowledge that there's no scientific proof. It's this fascinating ability to hold both belief and skepticism at the same time. But on the other hand, you have the skeptical viewpoint, which is crystal clear. As the writer Sophia Ferguson puts it, we really have to separate a charming tradition from what is scientifically valid. In this view, there's no real middle ground. Either it works or it doesn't. So ultimately, we're left with these two powerful, competing ideas. One that sees astrology as a symbolic, spiritual language for making sense of life's patterns, and another that sees it as a pseudoscience that just consistently fails to prove its claims when you test it. And this all leaves us with one final big question to chew on. What if we've been asking the wrong question this whole time? Maybe astrology's true, enduring power isn't about predicting what's going to happen to us, but about giving us a rich, symbolic framework to understand who we are, right here, right now.